At one point, the Loud House looked like Nickelodeon had finally done it. After years of desperately trying to find another breakout hit, the network struck gold with a simple idea. One kid, 10 sisters, and enough family chaos to keep the writers employed for years. Viewers loved it, critics praised it, merchandise flew off the shelves, and for a while, it genuinely looked like Nickelodeon had found its next big franchise. But that did not happen. Fast forward to today, and The Loud House is one of those shows that makes people go, wait, that's still on? While the show is still airing, it's largely faded from the spotlight, leaving many former fans wondering where everything went wrong. Was it the growing number of controversial episodes that seemed determined to make Lincoln suffer? Was it the sexual harassment scandal that led to the firing of the show's creator? Or was it something even stranger? Because somewhere along the way, The Loud House developed one of the most bizarre fandoms on the internet, a fandom filled with cursed DeviantArt posts, infamous fan fictions exploring incestuous themes, and even the longest piece of English literature ever written. So, what exactly happened to one of Nickelodeon's biggest success stories? In this video, we're exploring the rise of the Loud House, the controversies that surrounded it, the bizarre fandom that took on a life of its own, and how all of it contributed to the show's gradual downfall. So, let's begin. The Loud House first premiered on Nickelodeon on May 2nd, 2016, and almost immediately it became obvious that the network had something special on its hands. The premise was incredibly simple. The show followed 11-year-old Lincoln Loud, the only boy in a family of 11 children, as he somehow managed to survive life with 10 sisters, each with wildly different personalities. There was the overachieving oldest sister, Lori, the fashion-loving Lenny, the musical Luna, the goth Lucy, the comedian Luan, the athletic Lynn. You get the idea. Every sister had her own quirks, which meant every episode had endless possibilities for family chaos. On paper, it didn't sound like a revolutionary concept, but sometimes the simplest ideas are the hardest to get right. At the time, Nickelodeon had spent years searching for another breakout original cartoon. While SpongeBob SquarePants was still carrying the network on its porous little shoulders, newer series struggled to make the same cultural impact. Then The Loud House came along and reminded everyone that a good cast of characters could still carry an entire show. The series was an instant success. Its premiere attracted over 2 million viewers, making it one of Nickelodeon's strongest animated debuts in years. Even more impressive, several early episodes pulled in ratings that actually outperformed SpongeBob SquarePants in their respective time slots, a sentence that probably sounded impossible to Nickelodeon executives just a few years earlier. Critics were equally enthusiastic. The show's fast-paced storytelling, expressive animation, and energetic humor earned widespread praise, but what really won people over was just how relatable everything felt. Sure, most people don't have 10 siblings. If you do, our condolences, you're basically living in a sitcom. But underneath the exaggerated family dynamics were situations that almost everyone recognized. Fighting with siblings, competing for attention, trying to find a little privacy, embarrassing parents, school drama, awkward friendships. The Loud House took everyday family problems and cranked them up to cartoon levels without losing what made them feel genuine.
What are you doing? Surprise mime attack! I invented that one myself. Lynn, I'm not going to fight. Fine. I'll take care of this myself. You should do this.
Lincoln also made for an easy protagonist to root for. Unlike many cartoon leads who were either impossibly perfect or unbelievably incompetent, Lincoln felt like an actual kid. He wasn't always right, he wasn't always wrong, and most of the time he was just trying to survive another day in a house where the odds were permanently stacked against him.
Clyde, I'm in.
Hey, Lincoln.
Lucy, what are you doing in here?
I come here to think. I actually just wrote a new poem called Ventilate. Inside the wall, I choose to be alone. If I ever get stuck, please listen for my moan.
Right. You gave them the wrong picture.
Yep, I knew you'd blow this too.
No, I gave them the right one. The one that chose the real you. The perfect you.
Aww,
Thank you, Lincoln. By the way, you all might want to put your presents for Mom and Dad in here.
Another reason the series stood out was its surprisingly natural approach to representation. In the very first season, viewers were introduced to Howard and Harold McBride, the adoptive parents of Lincoln's best friend, Clyde. Their appearance marked one of Nickelodeon's first recurring same-sex married couples in an animated series.
Hi, fellas, come on in.
Hi, Mr. McBride. Hi, Mr. McBride.
The show never treated their relationship like a major announcement or a very special episode. They were simply Clyde's parents. That casual approach was widely praised by critics, LGBTQ+ advocacy groups, and many parents for normalizing diverse family structures in children's television, rather than turning them into a spectacle. As the audience continued to grow, so did the accolades. The Loud House received multiple Annie Award nominations, several Kids' Choice Award nominations and wins, and numerous Daytime Emmy Award nominations throughout its run. Critics frequently ranked it among Nickelodeon's strongest modern cartoons, and before long, it had become the network's flagship animated series. Naturally, Nickelodeon did what every entertainment company does when it finds a successful franchise. It expanded it a lot. In 2017, the series received its own comic book adaptation, giving fans even more stories featuring the Loud family. By 2019, Nickelodeon announced the Casa Grandes, a spin-off centered around Ronnie Ann Santiago and her extended family. The series premiered later that year and ran for 4 seasons, proving that the network believed the Loud House universe could support multiple shows at once. Then came the movies. In 2021, the Loud House movie premiered on Netflix, taking the family on an adventure to Scotland after discovering they were descendants of Scottish royalty. That same year also saw the release of A Loud House Christmas, the franchise's first live-action film. Nickelodeon doubled down again in 2022 with The Really Loud House, a live-action television series that attempted to recreate the animated show's success with real actors. More projects followed, including No Time to Spy in 2024, making it clear that Nickelodeon had no intention of slowing the franchise down anytime soon. By this point, The Loud House wasn't just a cartoon anymore. It was one of Nickelodeon's biggest brands. And as tends to happen whenever something becomes wildly popular online, the fandom exploded alongside it. Communities dedicated to the show popped up across Reddit, Tumblr, and especially DeviantArt. Fans debated their favorite sisters, ranked episodes, created alternate universes, drew crossover artwork, and wrote thousands upon thousands of fanfictions. The Loud House fandom became uncontrollable to the point that one person in the community ended up writing a fanfic that is almost 30 million words long. It's said to be one of the longest pieces of English literature ever written. While calling this fanfic literature would be a huge disrespect, it actually gives us all a hint as to how unhinged, insane, and bizarre the Loud House fandom became. Many fans argue to this day that the fandom of the show played a huge role in ruining its overall image. While we do agree a tiny bit, it's also hard to ignore some other factors that marked the beginning of the show's downfall. Because while the Loud House was becoming one of Nickelodeon's biggest success stories, small cracks were already beginning to appear. Certain episodes started frustrating longtime fans, criticism of the writing slowly grew louder, and behind the scenes, events were unfolding that would permanently change the future of the series. Let's start by discussing the one Loud House episode that made everyone go, "What in the actual hell?" Many fans argue that this episode, titled No Such Luck, single-handedly destroyed the show's reputation and sparked the entire Lincoln torture discussion. No Such Luck aired in March 2017 during the show's second season. And when we say the writing in this episode was unbelievably bad, we're really not exaggerating. The episode starts with Lincoln expressing his desire for something every kid wants from time to time, a little alone time. Living in a house with 10 sisters meant he was constantly expected to attend softball games, music recitals, charity events, and basically every activity his sisters signed up for. His calendar wasn't his own anymore, it revolved entirely around his sisters' schedules. While he's in the middle of explaining this to the audience, Lynn, the family's athletic sister, shows up and asks if he'll be coming to her softball game. When Lincoln refuses, she literally threatens him with a baseball bat.
Hey, Lincoln! You're coming to my softball game today, right?
Dang it. Should have done a head count. Sorry, Lynn. I just can't do it today.
Sure you won't reconsider?
Yeah, that right there should have been the first sign of Lincoln's terrible fate in this episode. Lincoln is forced to attend the game, and when Lynn's team loses, she somehow comes to the conclusion that he's bad luck. At first, Lincoln pushes back against the idea because, it's completely ridiculous. But the next day, he realizes he can actually use this superstition to his advantage. If everyone believes he's bad luck, maybe they'll finally stop dragging him to every single one of their events, and he'll get some much needed time to himself. So, he leans into the lie. Unfortunately, it backfires in the worst way imaginable. Everyone in the house starts believing he's genuinely cursed and begins excluding him from everything. And when we say everyone, we mean everyone, even his own freaking parents. The episode becomes so unbelievably toxic toward Lincoln that people were genuinely wondering where Child Protective Services was in Royal Woods. We are not even kidding. His perfectly sane parents make him sleep outside the house, force him to eat his meals outdoors, and even leave him behind while the rest of the family goes to the beach and then to the movies.
Dibs on holding the popcorn!
Whoa, 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 whoa. Not so fast, son. I wish you could come, but with your bad luck, who knows what could go wrong.
One of the biggest complaints wasn't just that Lincoln suffered, cartoon protagonists suffer all the time. The problem was that every single member of the Loud family suddenly became irrational and unnecessarily cruel. Characters who normally cared about Lincoln completely abandoned him over an obvious superstition, which many fans felt betrayed the show's entire message about family. Every member of the family was acting wildly out of character. For example, Lisa, a literal child genius who builds inventions that would put NASA to shame, somehow starts believing this bad luck nonsense just because Lincoln intentionally broke a few of Laurie's belongings. On top of that, fans also pointed out several smaller writing mistakes. For instance, Lenny asks everyone to attend her charity fashion event on the same day as Lynn's softball game, only to invite Lincoln to that same charity event again the following day.
Better believe it.
And after that, you're all coming to my charity fashion show, right? Lincoln, are you coming to my charity fashion show? It's for a great cause.
Now, people were already upset by how abusive and toxic the Loud family had become, but what really pushed them over the edge was the ending. There was no apology, no lesson learned, no moral of the story, nothing. The family welcomes Lincoln back, not because they realized they treated him horribly, but because they believe his bad luck magically disappeared after he put on a squirrel mascot costume, which is just bizarre, to say the least. The episode generated massive backlash and gave birth to discussions across Reddit, DeviantArt, and countless other forums about Lincoln torture and Lincoln abuse, where fans argued that Lincoln had slowly become nothing more than the show's punching bag. Another example of poor and downright stupid writing is an episode called Brawl in the Family. On paper, it sounded harmless enough. Laurie and Lenny accidentally buy the same dress, start arguing over it, and the conflict spirals from there. Pretty standard sitcom stuff, right? Well, not exactly. The episode introduces something called the Sister Fight Protocol, which is apparently the Loud family's official emergency procedure for when two sisters start arguing. Instead of acting like normal human beings and telling them to knock it off, everyone has to rearrange their entire lives to keep the two separated, as if they're rival crime bosses who absolutely cannot be in the same room together.
I'm done with this. You guys and your stupid fight have ruined the whole day. It's time to get over it and make up.
Somehow, Lincoln, the kid who's lived in this house his entire life, has absolutely no idea this protocol exists. Apparently, even Laurie's boyfriend knows about it, but Lincoln, the person who actually lives there, it's brand new information for him. But somehow, Lincoln not knowing about the Sister Fight Protocol isn't even the weirdest part of this episode. That honor goes to Rita and Lynn Sr., who spend the entire episode making some of the most baffling parenting decisions imaginable. Instead of sitting Laurie and Lenny down for a 5-minute conversation, which, last time we checked, is kind of the whole job description, they fully commit to this ridiculous protocol. They make the sisters eat their meals separately, reorganize the entire house around their argument, and treat a disagreement over a dress like it's a full-blown hostage negotiation. Then, when the fight inevitably spreads to almost every sister in the house, do the parents finally step in? Of course not. They grab baby Lily, lock themselves in their bedroom, and basically decide, you know what, good luck Lincoln, you're the parent now. Which somehow leaves an 11-year-old boy as the most responsible person in the entire house.
We'll ride a storm out in here.
Did you remember the bucket?
Dang it.
Naturally, Lincoln tries to fix the situation because at this point, he can't watch TV, he can't relax, and he can barely exist in his own home without getting caught in someone else's argument. Unfortunately for him, this is one of those episodes where the writers seem determined to make every decision backfire. Every attempt Lincoln makes only makes things worse. The argument spirals completely out of control, and by the end, guess who gets blamed? Yep, Lincoln. When the fight escalates beyond repair, Lincoln decides he's had enough and spends the night at his best friend Clyde's house. But when he returns the next morning, he finds out that all of his sisters have magically made up. Great, right? Well, not exactly. Instead of apologizing for turning his life into a complete disaster over 2 identical dresses, they basically tell Lincoln that him leaving the house was what solved the problem.
We're over that. We made up.
All of you?
Correct. Threat level is back to Field of Daisies.
Fix everything.
No, Lincoln. You fixed everything.
Me? How?
By leaving.
Needless to say, fans were not exactly impressed by this absolute masterpiece of an episode. The problem was that every single adult and almost every character had to temporarily lose all common sense just to make the plot work. The parents stopped acting like parents, the sisters stopped acting like their own characters, and Lincoln somehow ended up being the only person trying to solve the problem. No Such Luck and Brawl in the Family are easily 2 of the dumbest episodes to come out of the franchise, but they certainly weren't the only ones to receive criticism. Others, like L Is for Love and One of the Boys, also divided the fan base for very different reasons. L Is for Love sparked controversy among a small section of the audience for revealing that Luna had a crush on a girl named Sam. While some viewers criticized the episode over its LGBTQ+ representation, the overwhelming response was actually positive, with many fans praising the show for its natural and inclusive approach. One of the Boys, on the other hand, was criticized for an entirely different reason. The episode begins with Lincoln wishing he had 10 brothers instead of 10 sisters because he's tired of dealing with them. His wish comes true, and suddenly he's living in an alternate reality filled with the Loud brothers instead. On paper, this was an incredible concept. Nickelodeon had the perfect opportunity to explore what the Loud family would look like if everyone's gender were reversed. Many fans still agree that the premise had tons of potential. Unfortunately, the writers completely fumbled it. Instead of giving each brother a unique personality like the sisters, they basically made them all the same person. While the Loud sisters each had their own hobbies, interests, and quirks, the Loud brothers were practically clones of one another. They burped, they farted, they smelled bad, they broke everything in sight, and that was pretty much their entire personality.
Sorry, I'm touching the pizza with my booger picking finger.
Are you kidding me? You use your finger for your booger picking? I use my thumb.
Really?
I use my toe. I use this one.
The intended message was clearly supposed to be grateful for the family you have, but the episode ended up coming across more like, girls might be annoying, but boys are just gross, destructive cavemen. And just to keep the trend alive, Lincoln spends almost the entire 11-minute episode absolutely miserable once again. Now, that's everything that happened on screen that rubbed people the wrong way. But there were also some deeply disturbing things unfolding behind the scenes that had a lasting impact on the show's reputation. While what we're about to discuss didn't directly destroy the Loud House, it certainly contributed to its eventual decline. We're talking about the show's creator, Chris Savino, who was accused of sexually harassing multiple women in the animation industry, allegations that ultimately led to his firing from Nickelodeon. Ironically, the Loud House was heavily inspired by Savino's own life. He grew up in a family with 10 siblings, where he was the 9th child and spent much of his childhood in Michigan, which also inspired the show's setting. While researching this script, one thing that really stood out was just how established he already was in the animation industry. Before creating the Loud House, he'd worked for all 3 major children's networks, Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and Disney, and had credits on shows like the Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Laboratory, My Little Pony, and Kick Buttowski. In other words, this wasn't some struggling animator who threw away a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Savino had spent decades building a successful career and then managed to throw it all away by being an absolute creep. In October 2017, at the height of the Me Too movement, Cartoon Brew published a report revealing that numerous women in the animation industry had accused Savino of making unwanted sexual advances, sending explicit messages, his position, and pressuring women for sexual favors. Soon after, more women came forward with remarkably similar stories, with several claiming this behavior had been going on for well over a decade. One anonymous animation artist described how Savino initially presented himself as a mentor before sending her explicit messages, unsolicited photos, and repeatedly asking her to sleep with him. She also alleged that he offered her freelance work in exchange for favors, making her so uncomfortable that she eventually turned down an opportunity to work at Nickelodeon simply because she knew he'd be there. Ann Walker Farrell, who later worked as a director on BoJack Horseman, also came forward and accused Savino of harassing her roughly 15 years earlier. Another anonymous source told Cartoon Brew that Savino had behaved similarly toward her friend at Nickelodeon, allegedly using his status to pursue younger women and retaliating when his advances were rejected. The allegation sparked immediate backlash. On October 18, 2017, Nickelodeon announced that it had ended its relationship with Savino. What many people found troubling, however, was the claim that concerns about his behavior had circulated within the animation industry for years before any action was taken. According to several women, his reputation was something of an open secret. A few days later, Savino posted a public apology on Facebook, writing, "I am deeply sorry and I am ashamed." Unsurprisingly, the statement did little to calm the criticism, with many arguing that apologies tend to come much more easily once someone has already been caught. In the end, Savino was fired, but the Loud House continued under a new creative team. The show survived, but one of the biggest names behind it was gone, and the controversy would remain attached to its legacy for years to come. Now, after Savino left, Michael Rubiner was promoted to showrunner in his place. It would be wrong to say that the show became bad immediately after Savino's departure because that simply wasn't the case. Season 3 continued attracting roughly the same audience, and the public perception of the series remained largely positive. It wasn't until Season 4 that people really started noticing a shift, which also marked the true beginning of the Rubiner era. Since animation production begins long before episodes actually air, much of Season 3 was still developed under Savino's creative direction. Season 4 was the point where fans finally started realizing that something had changed. We wouldn't necessarily say the show suddenly became terrible, but it definitely started moving in a very different direction, and the emotional core that people had fallen in love with slowly began to disappear. In the earlier seasons, viewers got relatable stories about sibling rivalries, school problems, chores, family drama, and everyday situations that felt surprisingly grounded despite the cartoon setting. From season 4 onward, however, the stories became much more over the top. Suddenly, there were sci-fi adventures, fantasy plots, groundbreaking inventions, apocalyptic scenarios, ghosts, and all sorts of bizarre concepts that felt completely different from what the show originally was. The grounded family sitcom that audiences had connected with no longer had the same appeal. While some fans welcomed these changes, others felt like the show had lost the charm that made it special in the first place. Another thing fans took issue with was how the writers changed Lincoln's role in the series. In the beginning, Lincoln was the heart of the show. He constantly broke the fourth wall, narrated the story, and the entire premise revolved around him trying to survive life with 10 sisters. But as the seasons went on, more and more episodes shifted their focus towards side characters and individual sisters. In some cases, Lincoln barely appeared at all. Many fans agree that seasons 4 and 5 marked the beginning of the show's decline, after which it slowly started fading from the mainstream conversation. But the changing direction of the series wasn't the only thing that rubbed people the wrong way. From 2019 onward, Nickelodeon expanded the Loud House franchise at an aggressive pace, and many fans began experiencing what could only be described as franchise fatigue. First came the Casagrandes in 2019, then in 2021, Nickelodeon released the Loud House movie on Netflix. That same year, they followed it up with a Loud House Christmas, a live-action holiday movie. Now, we wouldn't call either of these projects complete failures. In fact, many fans still think A Loud House Christmas is a fun little family movie. However, there was also plenty of criticism aimed at the acting, the costumes, and the special effects, all of which many viewers felt looked surprisingly cheap. Even so, the movie was generally accepted by a large portion of the fandom. The criticism surrounding franchise fatigue really grew louder in 2022 though, when Nickelodeon basically said, you know what, let's make an entire live-action sitcom too. The Really Loud House premiered in 2022, and a lot of fans were left scratching their heads, wondering why it even needed to exist. The animated show was still airing, so why did there also need to be a version with real actors? At its core, The Loud House became successful because it was animated. Animation gives you the freedom to exaggerate facial expressions, slapstick comedy, and over-the-top reactions in ways that simply don't translate the same in live action. Let me put it this way, how would you feel if someone decided to remake Tom and Jerry with a real cat and a real mouse? The Loud House was a concept that naturally belonged in animation. On top of that, the original series wasn't exactly setting the world on fire anymore. So instead of improving the main show, Nickelodeon seemed more interested in expanding the franchise as much as humanly possible. A 2022 CBR article titled 10 Cartoons That Don't Deserve Their Popularity made a very similar point, stating Nickelodeon tried too hard to match SpongeBob's influence and immediately took to creating spin-offs, a Netflix movie, and countless merchandise. These efforts may have been justified had the Loud House not been written with one-note stock characters making up its main cast. And we kind of agree. Now, with all of that out of the way, we're left with one final factor that may have contributed to the Loud House's eventual downfall, and that is its downright bizarre fandom. And to be completely fair, the Loud House fandom might just be one of the most unhinged, disturbing, and unnecessarily dark fandoms on the internet. We're talking incest fanfiction, creepy and fan art, adult games based on the characters, and fan works so disturbing that one of them even ended up getting someone arrested. When The Loud House premiered in 2016 and quickly became Nickelodeon's biggest modern cartoon, the fandom exploded alongside it. At first, everything was pretty normal. Fans made cute artwork, edited scenes from the show, posted memes on Tumblr, and discussed episodes on Reddit and DeviantArt. You know, typical cartoon fandom behavior. But then things started getting weirder, and then even weirder. Somewhere along the way, a certain group of people looked at a show about one boy living with 10 sisters and somehow came to the conclusion that this was the perfect setup for incest fanfiction. This eventually gave birth to what became known as Loudcest, a corner of the fandom dedicated almost entirely to pairing Lincoln with one or more of his sisters. Sometimes the artwork was surprisingly well made, other times it looked like it had been drawn in Microsoft Paint at 3 in the morning. Either way, the subject matter was equally disturbing. The content ranged from romantic couple artwork all the way to explicit adult illustrations and stories. By the late 2000s, there were literally hundreds of these fan creations scattered across sites like DeviantArt, Tumblr, and various fanfiction forums. In fact, Loudcest became so common that longtime fans often joked it was nearly impossible to browse the Loud House fan content without eventually stumbling across it. And somehow, it got even stranger. Around 2016, Loudcest spawned its own mini fandom known as the Sin Kids. The entire concept revolved around children, supposedly born from incestuous relationships between Lincoln and his sisters. Yes, people didn't just create incest stories, they created the next generation of characters based on those incest stories. The Sin Kids developed a surprisingly active following of its own, with original artwork, character designs, and discussions appearing across DeviantArt, Reddit, and other fan communities. Thankfully, the trend lost most of its momentum by the early 2020s, which is probably for the best. Unfortunately, Loudcess itself never really disappeared. Even today, it's still one of the most recognizable and notorious parts of the fandom. And if you think that's where the rabbit hole ends, it really doesn't. There is even a full-blown adult video game called The Ludist House, which, as the name subtly suggests, revolves around Lincoln entering romantic and sexual relationships with several of his sisters. There is inappropriate imagery, plenty of unsettling storylines, and of course, a very questionable fan base. In September 2024, a YouTuber called No Text to Speech uploaded a video covering the game after discovering its Discord server, where, disturbingly, there appeared to be underage users interacting with the community. He pointed out several alarming details, including the fact that the game's creator, DMF, was reportedly 28 years old. Just let that sink in for a second. A fully grown adult spending his time making a game that sexualizes underage characters from a Nickelodeon cartoon. As if that wasn't bad enough, the creator even attempted to defend the project by writing, "This is a video game where stories and characters are 100% fictional. As fictional as in most video games where you have to kill, rob banks, do illegal street racing, and other stuff you would not do in real life." Yeah, nice try. Comparing fictional crime mechanics to child characters isn't exactly the airtight defense he thought it was. What was even more baffling though was the community surrounding the game. Most people in the Discord server didn't seem bothered by it at all. They were there because they genuinely enjoyed it. To make matters worse, the creator claimed in one of his posts that the game had reached around 150,000 downloads by 2024. If that's accurate, the number has probably grown even larger because the game is still online and continues to receive updates. Sadly, that's just one example of how unbelievably strange this fandom became. Because then there's The Loud House, Revamped, a fanfiction written by a creator named James Dean that somehow ballooned into one of the most infamous fan projects on the internet. Depending on how it's measured, it's estimated to be well over 30 million words, making it longer than the Bible several dozen times over, and one of the longest works of English writing ever produced. Although even that title comes with an asterisk, a lot of people dispute the record because huge portions of the story consist of copied Loud House episode scripts and material pulled from other sources. So while it's undeniably enormous, not everyone considers it the longest original work of fiction. And honestly, we don't think many people have actually finished reading the thing. The story begins as a fairly straightforward self-insert fanfiction. A character named James Knudsen moves to Royal Woods, befriends Lincoln and the Loud family, and gradually becomes the central protagonist. Before long, he starts forming romantic relationships with several of Lincoln's sisters, and from there, the story completely abandons reality. As the chapters pile up, Revamped stops feeling like a Loud House fanfiction altogether. Characters from franchises like Naruto, Ed and Eddie, and Woody Woodpecker begin showing up until the story transforms into one giant crossover where almost anything can happen, which is already bizarre enough on its own. But perhaps the strangest part is that this wasn't written by a teenager with too much free time. The author was an adult in his late 30s who spent years expanding this project into something so massive that it reportedly exceeded fanfiction.net's word counter. Now, we're still not done with the absolute unhingedness of the Loud House fandom because somehow it manages to get even worse. Seriously, when we started researching this section, we had no idea just how unbelievably cursed this rabbit hole was. Let's talk about Loud House Alternate Universes, or AUS. Now, AUs have always been a normal part of the fandom. Fans would draw the Loud family in different scenarios and post comics on platforms like DeviantArt and Tumblr. You had harmless ideas like, what if Lincoln had 10 brothers instead of 10 sisters? Or, what if the characters were older? You know, normal fan content. Then TikTok got involved. Around 2024, a Loud House AU trend exploded on the platform, and much like many things that go viral on TikTok, it absolutely did not need to exist. The rabbit hole started when a TikToker named SwagDogHot uploaded artwork of Lincoln wearing an over-the-top purple suit with the words "Pimp Lincoln" plastered across the screen. Naturally, everyone was confused. Alongside that, the creator also posted artwork showing two completely different versions of the Loud family. One depicted them as a happy, healthy household, while another showed Mr. and Mrs. Loud dead, with all the sisters looking severely malnourished. People immediately wanted to know what on earth they were looking at, so the creator explained the lore. According to this alternate universe, Mr. and Mrs. Loud had gambled away the family's money before dying, leaving 11-year-old Lincoln to become the family's provider. And by provider, we unfortunately mean he was supposedly forcing his sisters into prostitution while deliberately starving them to maintain what he considered the ideal weight. Yes, that was the actual backstory. The creator even posted a full storyline where Lincoln essentially sells Lori, the oldest sister to his best friend, Clyde. During the scene, Clyde says, "Nice rack, Lori," while Lincoln stands in the background smiling as the song Everything Goes, according to plan, plays over the video. Somehow, this ended up getting well over 1 million views on TikTok. Now, by this point, we've already established that the Loud House fandom can be pretty bizarre. But what makes this whole thing even crazier is that TikTok absolutely ate it up. The hashtag #PimpLincoln started going viral. People made fan art, expanded the lore, created fake movie trailers, cosplayed the characters, and even invented entirely new storylines for this already absurd alternate universe. The weirdest part, though, was that a huge number of people jumping on the trend had absolutely no idea it was based on a Nickelodeon cartoon about an 11-year-old boy living with his sisters. They just saw a dramatic story with dark edits and decided, yeah, I'm invested now.
Stripes, whoa, everything goes on. Don't give a fuck, shut the fuck up, get on your knees and cry.
Why, then when you think about me, I love those years ago, yes.
Just and hoes, a beer bottle, break it, watch me bleed.
It's fictional, we understand that, but we're still talking about an 11-year-old boy being depicted smoking, drinking beer, beating up his sisters, and seeing them. Most of the sisters are underage, by the way. It was an incredibly dark AU, and that's probably one of the reasons it spread so quickly on TikTok. The platform has a habit of taking the most bizarre and over-the-top ideas and turning them into viral trends. At this point, we've seen that happen more times than we can count. But we'll have plenty of time to make fun of bizarre TikTok trends later, because it's time to talk about another infamous corner of the Loud House fandom, the Sad Loud House. This was the nickname fans gave to a large section of the community, particularly on DeviantArt, that was almost entirely dedicated to tragic, depressing, and emotionally heavy fan art and stories. The trend really took off between 2016 and 2018, and it's honestly just another bizarre chapter in this fandom's history. One of the biggest examples came from an artist named JFM Studios, whose series The Sad Loud House seemed to have one simple mission: make every character as physically and emotionally miserable as possible. Seriously, there was sadness everywhere. You had artwork of Lori getting into horrific accidents while trying to visit her boyfriend. Other pieces showed her being cheated on. Luna was depicted sitting in a dark alley, clutching a beer bottle after supposedly being pressured into drinking. Lincoln's favorite stuffed rabbit, Bun Bun, gets torn to pieces while he breaks down crying over it, and that's just scratching the surface. There is another fanfiction following a similar theme called Requiem for a Loud, where Lincoln is diagnosed with an aggressive brain tumor and given only a few days to live. The story then follows the Loud family as they come to terms with his impending death. While everything we've talked about so far is already pretty wild and disturbing, it still looks relatively mellow once we get to some of the fan comics based on the Loud House. There is literally a mountain of disgusting material floating around this fandom, but the comics we're about to discuss somehow managed to stand out as some of the most bizarre pieces of fiction ever created. Let's take the fan comic It's Not Your Fault, for example. From a purely artistic standpoint, it's honestly very well made. The artwork is polished, the storytelling is engaging, and at first glance, it genuinely looks like a professionally published comic. Then you actually start reading it, and that's when you realize you've made a terrible life decision. The story dives headfirst into deeply disturbing subject matter involving Lincoln and Sam. She apparently forces herself onto an 11-year-old Lincoln, then becomes pregnant and gives birth to a daughter. She is the daughter. If you think that's bizarre, don't worry. The fandom somehow found a way to outdo itself. There's another infamous comic where Lincoln is shown being taken advantage of by his own sister, Luna. Page after page is filled with uncomfortable, incestuous scenes, disturbing imagery, graphic violence, and themes that just keep getting darker the further you read. At some point, you stop questioning the plot and start questioning the author's internet search history. Then we have Rewrite the Stars, created by the same person behind It's Not Your Fault. While it doesn't rely on the same kind of explicit content, it still explores an incredibly uncomfortable relationship involving Lincoln and his own sister, Lynn. And finally, we have perhaps the most infamous comic of them all. Back in 2016, an artist known as It's Jump Jump began publishing the Loud comic, a story packed with enough disturbing themes to make you physically uncomfortable. Lincoln is involved in romantic relationships with not one, but two of his sisters, while another secretly obsesses over him, spies on him through hidden cameras, and anyone she sees as competition. Luan is essentially portrayed as the main antagonist. She obsessively draws pictures expressing her love for Lincoln, despite her therapist repeatedly telling her how unhealthy it is. She eventually murders Lincoln's love interest, Ronnie Ann, in a particularly gruesome way and plots revenge against anyone else who gets close to him. Meanwhile, Lincoln is also involved in full-blown incestuous relationships with both Lucy and Lynn, because apparently one horrifying plotline simply wasn't enough. Now, here's the part that somehow makes this story even stranger. The Loud comic was never finished, and honestly, we're perfectly okay with that. Not because the creator lost motivation, he clearly had plenty of it, but because he later claimed he was arrested in 2017. Nobody even knew this had happened until the creator himself posted about it on Tumblr. According to his account, he lived in the United Kingdom, someone reported the comic to the authorities, his electronic devices were seized, and he temporarily lost custody of his children during the investigation. He also claimed that he was eventually acquitted and later regained custody of his kids. The comic, however, remains unfinished. And for perhaps the first time in this entire fandom, that's probably for the best. Now, to be completely fair, none of this bizarre fan content was Nickelodeon's fault. The writers weren't sitting in the office approving Loudcest fan art or brainstorming TikTok AUs where Lincoln somehow becomes a crime boss. That's entirely on the internet. But the fandom still ended up affecting the show's reputation in a very real way. Over time, the Loud House stopped being known just for its episodes. It also became known for having one of the weirdest fandoms on the internet. Search for the show online, and there's a good chance you'll stumble across disturbing fan art, cursed comics, or questionable fanfiction before you even find a clip from the actual series. For many people who had never even watched the Loud House, their first exposure to the franchise wasn't Nickelodeon's cartoon at all. It was the fandom. And unfortunately, first impressions matter. So, where does the Loud House stand today? Ironically, nobody seems to have a definitive answer. Back in February 2026, longtime writer and co-producer Kevin Sullivan announced that he was leaving Nickelodeon after more than 2 decades with the company. In response to a fan asking why, Sullivan explained that the Loud House had finished production and there were no other projects at Nickelodeon for him to move on to. Naturally, fans immediately assumed the show had quietly been cancelled. The internet, being the internet, wasted absolutely no time declaring the series dead. But just a day later, Sullivan returned to clear things up. He explained that he hadn't quit, the Loud House had not been cancelled, and the crew was simply waiting to hear whether Nickelodeon would order another production season. Season 9 had already wrapped production, and until the network made a decision, there simply wasn't any work left for him to do. Nickelodeon later confirmed that the show had not been cancelled. So, as of today, the Loud House is in a rather strange position. It's not officially over, but it's also not actively moving forward. It's basically sitting in animation limbo, waiting for Nickelodeon to decide whether the Loud family still has another chapter left to tell. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. What do you think ultimately caused the downfall of the Loud House? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and as always, thanks for watching.